Welcome to Becoming Your Healthiest Self. In this session, we're going to look at diet wars, specifically having to do with the low carb or keto versus the plant-based ideologies. The extreme on the low carb side would be the carnivores who eat no carbohydrates versus the herbivores or the whole food plant-based diet people, also known as vegans. And then the people that are eating, more in the middle ground, vegetarians, flexitarians who would eat meat every once in a while, the lacto-vegetarians that, of course, would have milk products or cheese. Ovo refers to eggs, and then ovo-lacto vegetarians would be those who eat the eggs and the milk products. And then the pescatarians would have some fish along with those veggies. One thing all groups agree upon is that the fast foods and processed food environment are not healthy for anyone. I want to start with this quote. It's from the Baha'i Writings, and it says, "Do not allow differences of opinion or diversity of thought to separate you from your fellow men or to become a cause of dispute, hatred, and strife in your hearts." And then this idea also from the Baha'i Writings to have elevated conversations. And it says that through an exchange of this kind, consciousness of spiritual forces is raised. Apparent dichotomies yield to unexpected insights. A sense of unity and common calling is fortified. Confidence that a better world can be created is strengthened. And a commitment to action becomes manifest. In our program, we're looking at all of these factors. And this is the third session having to do with nourishment. And then we're going to move on to movement and unwinding and sleeping. And we're going to finish with connection and love. Dietary risk factors, we know they're number one on the list as far as what's causing preventable disease. So the root causes of disease, emotional, spiritual, physical, we know that it all matters. But as far as the physical problem, it has to do with disequilibrium in the body. And this again is from the Baha'i Writings. As to physical agents, which are the primary cause of illness, their effect is due to the following. The human body is composed of numerous elements according to a particular state of equilibrium. So long as this equilibrium is maintained, man is preserved from sickness. But should this fundamental balance, which is the central requirement of a sound constitution, be upset, the constitution will be disrupted and illness will supervene. And it says physical healing cannot be complete and lasting unless it is reinforced by spiritual healing. So yes, the emotional and spiritual components matter also, right? And then do not neglect medical treatment when it is necessary, but treat disease through diet by preference. We've been looking at metabolic syndrome these last few sessions, and we know that diet is at the root as far as the causes of metabolic syndrome, along with other lifestyle factors, but diet's number one. This process occurs over many years in which the insulin levels start to rise, get increased body fat, increased blood pressure, cholesterol, and finally blood sugars start to rise. The solution, of course, is to deal with the root problem of diet. Metabolic syndrome refers to this group of risk factors when these all get out of whack, so to speak. The one that's easiest for us to look after ourselves is the enlarged waistline. You could also look at the bathroom scale. That could be a really useful tool as well. So what about the viewpoint from the low carb approach? Basically, the idea is when the blood sugar spikes, we get this high, but then it's followed by a low. And then we're going to want to eat more junky foods all day long, right? We're in this high and low state. But it's due to this high blood sugar, high carbohydrate in the diet. Generally, we could all relate to it. So what are the ultra-processed carbs or refined carbohydrates? Definitely the sugars and definitely the refined grains. these both have empty calories, right? They've been stripped of their fiber and nutrition. And then they're high on this glycemic index, meaning they spike the blood sugar levels. And we know that eating foods high on the glycemic index has been linked to overeating and increased risk of many diseases. So what happens is the glucose spikes, but then the insulin response needs to also go up in order to get the blood sugar out of that bloodstream. And as this happens, right, then we get a low in our blood sugar level, and we might feel like we need another hit of those processed carbohydrates. We get another high. And meanwhile, insulin levels haven't been able to go down all the way. They need to go right back up. And we get this roller coaster effect. As this is happening, we can't burn fat efficiently. And these are the foods. We all know what they are. These kind of foods get us on this roller coaster. So sugar is indeed a refined product. So you have to take out a lot of fiber and nutrients in order to end up with sugar. And the same way with wheat products and grain products, by the time you take out the fiber and a lot of the nutrients, all you have left is the starch, and that is going to spike the blood sugar. There's something called the glycemic index, the glycemic load index, and the insulin index. So the glycemic index just has to do with how high the blood glucose level rises. The glycemic load is okay, how high does it raise, but also how long does it stay elevated? And then the insulin index, of course, just measures the insulin rate. And these are the responses to particular food items, or like the average response to a particular food for humans. So the insulin index, let's look at that. That might be the most important one. Indeed, these processed carbohydrates and sugars manifest in a very high insulin response that's required. But the big culprit would be the really refined products of candies, Mars bar there, 122, jelly beans, tops the scales at 160. So Americans are definitely eating way too much sugar, right? The one estimate is that we consume 19 teaspoons per day eating this processed food diet. But the World Health Organization has looked at the science and said to limit the amount of sugar to the equivalent of 6 teaspoons per day. A good number to know is that 4 grams sugar equals 1 teaspoon. So if you look at the labels on food products, you'll see that you can divide by 4 to find out the number of teaspoons that's in the product. So for example, if we look at this package of cocoa mix, we can see, well, how much sugar is in this one packet? We see 19 grams. So if we divide this by 4, we see that there's like 4 3/4 teaspoons worth of sugar in this one packet. So you see how easy it is to use up that limit of 6 teaspoons per day. But we know we need to restore the state of equilibrium. So when we have too much of something, right, we have to deal with it. And this is also from the Baha'i Writings. It says, for instance, if there is a deficiency in one of the component parts of the body and a surfeit or excess amount of another, the state of equilibrium is disturbed and illness occurs. Thus, if the sugar component becomes excessive, health is impaired. And when the physician forbids sweet and starchy foods, the sugar component diminishes, equilibrium is restored, and the illness is banished. But the low-carb folks don't stop there. They say, well, if carbohydrates are generally what causes an increase in blood sugar and increase in insulin response, then why not just eat more fats and meats and not spike the sugar at all? They might have pork for breakfast, chicken for lunch. Dinner might be fish or beef, for example. And having lots of fats and oils is good, with this mindset. So indeed, you end up with a lot of fat in the diet. Again, the theory is that if you can keep the insulin low, right, you're going to start burning fats. But does this pan out to be healthy for human beings? Well, the viewpoint of the vegetarian, the vegan, the whole food plant-based camp would say, no, we can't be eating that much fat and that much meat. It's just in the long run not going to work. And you say, well, why not eat more of the foods that are on the left side of the chart here, the lower calorie foods, and then you'll just naturally have, less fat, less metabolic syndrome. And indeed, the vegans and vegetarians do have the lowest rates of metabolic syndrome. There's been studies, for example, of the North American Seventh-day Adventists, about 150,000 of them over a period of time, starting in the 1960s, 3 different studies, the most recent being from the year around 2000 to the present. Since there's people in this group that eat meat, and then those who are vegetarian, and then also vegan, a large percentage of all 3, this has been a really good population to study. When you look at the results of these studies, it says that the published studies of North American Adventists paint a consistent picture across all 3 study cohorts, associating vegetarian diets with a lower body mass index, coronary heart disease, hypertension, type 2 diabetes, and metabolic syndrome. Similarly, the vegetarians have a lower risk of colon, gastrointestinal tract, and prostate and overall cancer. For example, we see that as far as body weight, only the vegans or the whole food plant-based group had normal body weight. These 4 studies compared vegetarians and non-vegetarians, found that the vegetarians did indeed have lower body weight or lower body mass index. And the vegans had the lowest rates of diabetes. The plant-based folks say, hey, it's important to look at the sugar and the carbohydrates, yes, but it's also important to think about the fats in the bloodstream. The belief is that this causes inflammation and causes problems for human beings. And so if we look at blood of someone after they have a plant-based diet with the protein from black beans and the fats from avocado, you see that there's a pretty clear look of the serum in the blood. However, from a meat-based diet, you can see that the blood is clouded with these fats. I want to show you a clip from this movie, The Game Changers, where they're talking about that very issue, but also this idea that you need to have a lot of meat protein to be healthy and strong. And so this movie addressed that idea.
I'd never really thought about it like that before. What else was in the food I was eating? An experiment to help answer that question was being conducted by Dr. Robert Vogel, co-chair of the NFL's subcommittee on cardiovascular health.
What you eat immediately before an athletic endeavor really can have major impact on how you perform. There's a direct correlation between a meal and endothelial function. The endothelium is the lining of blood vessels. It regulates blood flow throughout the body. It knows that a particular muscle group or organ needs more blood flow, and it dilates, it opens up. When the endothelium is impaired, it cannot open up. It cannot allow blood flow to increase as much, and therefore impairs athletic performance.
The test subjects were 3 football players from the Miami Dolphins, defensive back Michael Thomas, and wide receivers Griff Whalen and Kenny Stills.
For the touchdown, Kenny Stills!
Today, we're going to be feeding them 3 burrito breakfasts with a lot of protein. 2 of them have sources of animal-based protein and fat. One is from beef, one is from chicken. Third is a plant-based burrito, which has beans in it. So the protein and the fat came from a plant-based source. Tomorrow, we're going to feed them all bean burritos. We're looking at the impact of eating a different meal on the same people.
All right, here's the beef.
Thank you.
Chicken here. And I have a plant-based one here as well.
Thank you.
Griff has been plant-based for 4 years, so he got bean burritos on both days.
On away games, we always eat fried chicken. We eat Popeyes. I love fried chicken. I love Popeyes, and I'm gonna eat Popeyes every time.
2 hours after each meal, the players had their blood drawn and put into a centrifuge. The red blood cells sink to the bottom. An amber-colored fluid called plasma rises to the top. If the plasma is see-through, it means there's not much fat in the blood, and the endothelium is likely functioning well.
Michael, today's blood and yesterday's blood. This is a plant burrito. This is a meat burrito. Look at the difference it makes in what circulates in your bloodstream. Cloudy. Cloudy. And that's on top is the fat circulating in your blood from the meat burrito.
Gotcha.
Griff, you're the vegan. Here's your blood from today and your blood from yesterday. Nice and clear, both of them.
So the fat from the avocado doesn't have that kind of effect?
That's right. Kenny, you're the fried chicken guy. You want to see your chicken? There it is.
Yeah, it's pretty gross to see.
Sources of animal-based protein and fat have a tremendous impact on endothelial function. That lasts for 6 or 7 hours after you eat. So if you have bacon and eggs for breakfast, a hamburger for lunch, and a steak for dinner, this is going on all day long. Your blood is always cloudy, and the ability to operate at your best is always impaired.
Damn. I guess I won't be eating my fried chicken no more.
Dr. Vogel's experiment was backed up by numerous studies measuring how a single animal-based meal can impair blood flow. I also found a large body of research showing that plants have the opposite effect, improving endothelial function and increasing blood flow. Controlled studies show that simply drinking beet juice before training allows subjects to cycle 22% longer and bench press 19% more total weight.
I've seen races where it has come down to the 1,000th of a second. Sometimes you have to do things that you know your competitors aren't doing, getting every single advantage you can.
Knowing I could get enough energy and protein was one thing, but seeing what a single animal-based meal could do to an athlete's blood sealed the deal. It was time to give this plant-based thing a try.
There's another index known as the dietary inflammatory index. The negative number means that there's an anti-inflammatory effect to the body, and a positive number means that there's an inflammatory effect to the body. So when you see fiber or plant-based foods, there's an anti-inflammatory effect, and then you can see with cholesterol and saturated fat, there's a bit of an inflammatory effect measured in the body. And interestingly enough, the healthy fat that we hear about, right, omega-3, like for example, in avocados and nuts and seeds and some kinds of fish, there is this omega-3, and it has an anti-inflammatory effect. And some other things that have anti-inflammatory effect are these herbs and spices, good to know, and then green tea. Some oils that are also problems are these seed oils or plant-based oils. When they're in these kind of concentrations that's in the processed foods and that we're adding to our foods at home, end up being a big problem. So this linoleic acid, a little bit of it is fine. We actually need some of it to do certain things in our body, but it's not meant to be a fuel source in our diet. And there's actually a lethal dose. I was surprised to find this out. So you got to drink about a quart of it. It could potentially be lethal. And this shows the dramatic increase of the vegetable oils in the diet that just weren't meant to be there. And there's so much of it that's in the processed foods. And if we look at these processed foods, we see that, yeah, there's a ton of oil. Yeah, there's sugar and carbohydrates, processed carbohydrates, but there's also these oils. Greasy French fries. The oils are in actually all of those foods that you see in the picture, except maybe that Coca-Cola in the background there. Processed foods, they make up 70% of the U.S. diet. And sure enough, the U.S. leads the world in the rates of diabetes and metabolic syndrome. So these foods are high in calories, deficient in nutrients, and cause a state of disequilibrium in the body. So improving health by restoring equilibrium in the diet is important. One last quote here. It says that now the equilibration of these bodily components can be accomplished by one of two means, either through medicines or with foods. And when the constitution has recovered its equilibrium, illness is banished. Since all the constituent elements in the human body are also found in plants, if one of these components were to become deficient, and if one were to partake of the foods which are rich in that component, then equilibrium would be restored and the cure realized. The majority of the illnesses that afflict man also afflict animals, but the animal does not treat them through medicines. The animal's physician in the mountains and in the wilderness is its powers of taste and smell. The sick animal smells the plants that grow in the wilderness, eats those its smell and taste find to be sweet and fragrant, and is cured. It is therefore evident that it is possible to cure illness by means of fruits and other foods. But as the science of medicine has not yet been perfected, this fact has not been fully understood. Thanks a lot.